As you may know, the popular show Ed, and Eddy has been running for a long time. However, between October 7, 2003 and October 21st, 2003, episode 34 was accidentally released 1 week before it was scheduled to. It was also known to have someone around at the office. The primary writer had been sick with the flu, and instead of going on to make episode 34, the show was supposed to replay episode 1 at 5 AM Eastern. People reported a very disturbing new episode premiering in Cartoon Network. Some children were unfortunate enough to see it. Apparently the quality of the episode was mediocre when held to the regular standards. Animation was choppy, sound was constricted and very muffled. Reports of a line running up and down, similar to a crappy VHS tape, were received. Scenery was described as overwhelmingly dark and depressing, without changing props and other background objects. Stormy looking. Characters also behaved oddly. Instead of the normal goofy, hijinks-inspired personalities, viewers complained they seemed extremely agitated, graciously hateful toward each other, and constantly about of being sobbing after the lines. The protagonist also had a very bad lisp. No one knows why, but he spoke with a sexual tone and further bothered the viewers. I was one of these viewers. The episode began with Eddy walking down the street with Ed. I noticed that Ed was missing. There was an angular shot coming from in front of the two to show them walking down the viewer. He, Eddy, was wearing the angry look he does when something goes wrong. His eyes were red around the iris. Ed looked absolutely forlorn and practically dragged behind Eddy, tears in his eyes, which were both lazy and looking in the opposite outward directions. Kevin, the series antagonist, was riding the bike opposite of the Eds, toward them. The shot became blurry, and low moans were heard coming from Ed before Kevin hit him, which never happened because the screen went to black. The screen then snapped back, and Kevin was again headed toward Eddy. His view was so blurry this time, all I could see was a green blob headed toward a yellow one. Again the low moan, only this time it sounded like the microphone was broken, and a loud static came, greatly overshadowing the moan. A claymation sequence of Double D sleeping in Eddy's bed came up. Honestly, it may have just been the abruptness, but I jumped and shivered. Waking up and getting out of bed, he moved oddly around the circular room, the fast pitter-patter of footsteps being the only audio. The sounds were very clear as I was shown as a bird-eye view of him scampering around the room. There were no visible doors. Ed began screaming, sounds like a fish or cat, and he moved wildly around the cell for a room faster and faster until the screen became blurry again. The purple room's colour swallowing out orange blur. An extreme close-up of Eddy's front door sat in absolute silence for a magnificently long time, at least 2 minutes of dead silence in the door. Next we see Jimmy and Sarah at a doctor of some sort, probably oral. Jimmy, obscured in view by a hanging lamp, is crying loudly with Sarah trying to comfort him in the unusual warm fashion. "It hurts, Sarah! It hurts!" Suddenly, the door of the room smashed open by a new character, a dentist. His face wasn't shown because he was tall enough to be out of the shot. Sarah was escorted out of the room. Jimmy was shown. His headgear was mangled, the front bent back up, stretching his hip very high, tearing proportions. The front of his gums was trickling blood, and teeth were missing. The disturbing part was he had lost both arms and legs beforehand, apparently, and sat almost paralytic. I almost cried as I came to the conclusion the others had beaten him up and bent his gear. The camera stayed in his mangled face for a few seconds, still as a picture, silent as ever. Commercials came on. We are instantly assaulted with a very hairy Rolf in his darkened shed, fisting the Kai repeatedly. The visual loops and gets blurry again as the scene pans out. Naz is reading a magazine on her couch. The quality is now perfect. Eddy is now alone, without Ed. The quality climbs worse than before, and he's still walking. The sunlight lighting the room somewhat as he smiles and begins to run. The door is shown again, and we see Eddy's eyes as he reaches out and opens it. His house is nice and bright, but a very badly played violin is blaring, the only audio in the scene as he makes his way through the house. Eddy opens the door into his room. Johnny is shown under Naz's couch cushion as he crawls out on all fours in a comedic way and pops up behind her, still oblivious. I laughed because someone forgot to draw his eyes, and I thought of a mole. Suddenly I stopped laughing as he was starting swallowing her head. Still in like a cartoon fashion, of course, but this was different. He and she stayed like this until she started kicking and struggling. Johnny held her like she was just wet limp. A zoom in of his face revealed extremely small human eyes. Double E was lying on Eddy's floor, no longer in claymation. The camera showed Eddy's house for the remainder of the episode, about 3 minutes, and then the next program began on the spot.